Today on episode 71, I'm talking to Gretchen Bridgers from alwaysalesson.com, and we are discussing how to get that perfect elementary school job, as well as what to do once you've got it.
Welcome to the Teachers Need Teachers podcast, where we help new and beginning teachers navigate through those crazy first years of teaching so you can maintain your sanity and personal life. Here's your host, Kim Laprie.
Welcome to the Teachers Need Teachers podcast, a proud member of the Education Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kim Laprie, and this is the podcast for new and beginning teachers who don't want to just survive those first few years, but actually thrive. I'm super excited about today's episode because it is all about elementary school. And for those of you that have been listening, you know that I am a middle school teacher, and I taught elementary school band for about 2 years, but other than that, I don't have a whole lot of experience with elementary. So I called on an expert, Gretchen Bridgers, and I really wanted to pick her brain about what to do as a brand new elementary school teacher, because I know that for those of you that do teach elementary, you have very, very different needs. It's a very different world compared to secondary. So instead of trying to pretend like I know what you're going through, I decided to talk to someone who's actually been there. Now, before I dive into my interview with Gretchen, I wanted to thank those of you who have been supporting the podcast by subscribing, by leaving a rating and review, and by also being an awesome supporter. For my current awesome supporter, they get early access to all of my episodes, plus they get to see a recording of me podcasting. And so all of the mistakes that I've made before you hear this particular episode, they get to see those because they are an awesome supporter. So if you would like to join those ranks and support the podcast because you think that it is totally helping you out, you're finding it so valuable and addicting, and you come back every single week, then you can go to teachersneedteachers.com/support and you can sign up there. And don't forget that if you do sign up, then you get early access. And I also forgot to tell you that I send you an awesome, I keep using the word awesome, I send you a Teachers Need Teachers podcast sticker. So again, that website is teachersneedteachers.com/support.
Hi, I'm Amber Harper, host of the Burned In Teacher Podcast, a proud member of the Education Podcast Network, just like the podcast you're listening to right now. The opinions expressed are those of the individual hosts. Be sure to check out our other podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com and get ready because the learning begins in 3, 2, 1.
So at the time of this recording, it is back to school season. Even if you're not technically back to school like I am, you're starting to think about it. I mean, you can't go to Target without seeing all of the displays and signs and supplies for back to school. And I think it's kind of funny because I've seen on Instagram how some teachers who don't go back until September, they're like, let me finish my summer. Stop showing me back to school stuff. And honestly, I kind of feel that way about the holidays. I feel like they start bringing holiday stuff, like right now, we're probably going to see Halloween stuff pretty soon. And even before Halloween has started, we're seeing Thanksgiving. And then maybe at the end of October, we're going to see Christmas stuff. So I feel like everything comes out so early. And some of you may love that, but others feel like, I just want to be in the moment. And I totally get that. But for those of us who have back to school right around the corner, and you are a brand new teacher, especially, you're sort of wondering, what should I be doing? What should I be preparing? You're just sitting at home. You may not have access to your classroom or your curriculum. And so you're wondering, what are you supposed to do? Or maybe you don't even have the job yet. I'm going to tell you guys, a lot of schools hire up to the very last minute. I've had colleagues who've been hired the day before school starts. So if you don't have a job yet, there is still time. So in the meantime, how do you prepare for that, for the job? Or if you have the job, what are you supposed to be doing now. So I decided, like I said in the intro, to talk to an expert, Gretchen Bridgers, and I really want you guys to pay attention to her tips, especially for setting up the classroom, which you do and don't really need to do right now, because a lot of us feel this pressure to have these perfect classrooms right off the bat. And she kind of gives advice on how to sort of space that out and pace it so that you're not spending all of your hard-earned money right away, and so that you don't go insane from being overwhelmed by it. So here's my conversation with Gretchen. Gretchen, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, of course, I'm excited to chat with everyone who's listening. I've been listening to your show for a long time. Such a fan. So I'm excited to talk to you about all things elementary for our newer teachers.
Yay. So for those of my audience that don't know you, could you please tell us about your teaching experience and how you came to your current position?
Yeah, absolutely. So I taught in a Title I school for many years. I taught 2nd and 3rd grade and 5th grade. I then transitioned into a suburban school that had high parental involvement. That was a choice I made because I wanted to make sure I worked with lots of different kids. Right. I wanted to work for different administrators. I wanted to work just in a totally different environment with different leadership. That was really important to me because I wanted at one time to go that route, and I thought it was important to see lots of leaders in action. So I changed schools through our transfer fair, and that was great. But during all this time, I really wanted to lead teachers. So I had student teachers and I was mentoring my colleagues. Oh, nice. And then there was still this fire in me that was like, I want to work with teachers. I don't know what this looks like. So I was doing professional development when asked for our staff, and then that went out to the district. And then this opportunity came through the New Teacher Project. We had a cohort called Teach Charlotte. I'm here in Charlotte, North Carolina.
Okay.
And I got to work just with new teachers, and they were career changers. So they were older adults. They had different careers before this, decided they wanted to try teaching. So I worked with them through their student teaching placement with Teach Like a Champion. If you guys have not read that book,
yes,
highly
awesome.
suggest you do that. It's just bite-sized techniques for a novice to an experienced teacher, something for everybody. So we taught them that, and then we followed them through their first year as a coach. And I'm like, wait a minute, this is like a thing. I could make this my job to coach and help people. So that's when I decided to leap over to there and work there full time. And then I was blessed with some kids, and I decided, okay, I want to be able to stay home, but I also still love what I do. Like, how can I do both? Mm-hmm. So I created, it was a blog that I had done in the classroom at alwaysalesson.com, and I expanded that to have a podcast, the Empowering Educators podcast. And then I created resources for classroom teachers as well. And that's morphed into webinars. And then I also go out and do PD for different districts. So it's kind of evolved into this bigger thing than I ever imagined, but it's been so fun. And I think there's one lesson to share with your listeners. It's, you don't have to know where your path is going to go. Like, take it one step at a time. Opportunities will come. Make the best decision you can. I highly suggest doing something where you're switching up your environment. Try not to teach the same grade level all the time or the same subject. Like, really learn the art of teaching, and that requires you to get out of your comfort zone. And that is what I had learned through that very long answer to your question.
And a lot of elementary teachers I found, actually, they do switch grade levels a lot. So
absolutely. And well, I will tell you, there's this thing in elementary school where you have the K2 teachers and the 3-5 teachers. And it doesn't mean we're against each other. It just means you are either great with little humans or humans that are growing up to be a little bit older kids. Right. And I know that the kindergarten phase and the tying the shoelaces and using the potty all the time is not for me, that I'm not blessed with that talent. But I know the older kids who still love school and love their teacher, but really are ready to dive into content. That's where my heart beats. And so if someone's like, I don't even know, like, I go to elementary school and it's K5, how do you even know?
Right.
Well, think about, do you really want to help younger kids learn the structure of school and understand rules and getting along with each other and maybe some content stuff? Or do you want to really teach some deeper things? And then that would kind of be the older ways. So that hopefully helps some folks going into an elementary interview and they say, what grade would you like to teach? And they're thinking, I have no idea. Right. At least that helps you break it into 2 homes within one big home.
That's a great tip. Yeah. Because but then I wonder if a lot of them already kind of know, like, where their heart is. Do you know what I mean? Like, for me, I can only really teach 7th grade. I've tried to teach 8th grade, But I just know that with developmentally with seventh graders, I get them and that's my jam. So I think
there you go.
We just tend to be drawn to that particular age. Now you are obviously busy and you've done so much.
Yes.
And in addition to that, you did not mention that you wrote a book on your experiences, in the elementary classroom.
So listen to this story. I actually have it. If you're anyone that can see this video that's going on, this is the original. And like so original, I drew the illustration. That's how old this book is. Not even joking, but it's called Elementary Education 101. I wanted it to sound like a college title.
Right.
What they didn't teach you in college. And so it's all the nitty gritty stuff of, God, I wish I learned that. Or shoot, why didn't someone tell me that? And I released this book in my third year teaching, which is so super early to write a book. I certainly wasn't trying to be an expert, but what I wanted is I didn't want to forget all the overwhelming things that I was learning during those first 3 years. That's where you're considered new. So I was like, let me jot down all these ideas, and they were note cards. And then those note cards became a Word document. And then it became something like this, which is awesome. And I'm releasing the second edition this summer, which is jam-packed with even more stuff, which I'm super excited about. You can find that again on my website. But the table of contents just walks you through anything from the interview, like you're preparing for the job, and professional things that I didn't realize. Like I thought I was, following all the rules of the community. And then I'm like, ooh, I might have made a blunder here or there, because sometimes you just don't know what you don't know. So there's definitely some tips with professionalism, and especially now with the online space that can get crazy. Things about getting settled into your role and the nitty gritty of the role. And then what happens after that when you're in the group. So there's a whole chapter for that too. So if you are new or student teaching or just dreaming about being a teacher, definitely grab this book. It's super short. You can read it in a weekend. It's full of bullet points. It'll be great to get you started.
And I'll definitely put the links to that in the show notes so that you guys can grab a copy of the new edition. Yay!
That's right. Woo-hoo.
So applying for elementary, it's obviously going to be a little bit different than secondary level. And, they're going to be asked the same basic types of questions like, tell us about yourself, or, how do you build relationships? What other types of questions can they expect that's unique to elementary school?
Good. I'm so glad you asked. So I created, again, if you can't see this video, that's totally okay. But there is this packet of information, and it's called Preparing for an Interview. And I give you the questions that are asked, tips, and a whole planning guide to help you, because part of my role when I was working with the New Teacher Project was to go through hundreds of applications and find out what qualities make a great teacher. And so I'm like, I have all this information that I could give to someone, like, here's how to ace your interview, because it's so exhausting to think they're going to be staring at me and do I have the right answer? So I've broken it up for tips for a new teacher or just a veteran teacher changing roles like I did, or teacher leaders wanting to be coaches. So I would say, to answer your question first and foremost about the elementary, a lot of it's going to be content. Like, do you understand how to teach? Because you have to teach all the subjects. So they want to know that you have the knowledge base to do so. Okay. Sometimes they will let you departmentalize, where you will teach one or two subjects and then rotate, kind of like a middle school thing. Mm-hmm. And that's less common, but then there are huge levers with testing in elementary, with the end of grade tests and things. And that's usually in math and literacy. So they really want to make sure, hey, do you know how to do small group instruction? Do you know what a mini lesson is? Do you know how to differentiate? Do you understand guided reading, which is students reading on their own level? But then you're also conferencing one-on-one with them. And a new teacher is like, what is all this? I didn't learn all this in school. So you really need to find resources online for these subjects to make sure you can at least speak about them. And you don't have to act like you're an expert. Say, I am learning a lot about it and I can't wait to give it a try myself. And they understand that because you are new. So they're not expecting you to come in here knowing exactly, what that looks like. I would also say behavior management is a huge thing. So please be thinking through what that might look like in your classroom. If you're going to have a coin system or a ticket system or a red, yellow, green light system, whatever it is, something to help students adhere to the classroom protocol through some behavior management. I will say one thing that will make you look like an expert teacher is being preventive in as many ways as you can. Okay. Thinking through, if I give very clear instructions, well, then they can't be confused, ask a million questions and eat up my time. Or if I teach them the route in which they have have to move around the classroom and we practice it like a little train, which you think is a little silly, but then they can't say, I didn't know where to go, or I didn't know how to get these materials. So the more that you do ahead of the game, I think you'll realize that really cleans up a lot of the behavior management. So I would say those would be my tips for elementary level.
Okay. Yeah. And I mean, I can totally see why they would want to make sure that you understand the different subjects. That's one of the reasons why, for someone like me, teaching elementary is daunting. I can't imagine also teaching math and science and, social studies. And I just focus on just being an expert in one area. So I could see how they would kind of drill down and maybe throw in some jargon in there too. So I can imagine you'd want to know even some of your state standards in those off the top of your head. Because
that's a big question. Like, how would you teach? And then they rattle off a letter and you're like, hold on, let me look at what this means and what does this look like?
Which I think is unreasonable because, I mean, very few of us have all of the standards memorized with like the number and everything. So, but you never know. I think if they were to ask me that, I'd say, could you remind me again which one that was? And they say, oh, it's this. That's right. Okay. Just for you guys, in case you blank out, go ahead and ask them if they don't know what it is. Well, I don't know. That looks bad for them too.
That's right. One thing I wanted to make sure with teachers is why I created this whole interview packet is to understand the rationale behind a question, because it's not always just whatever the answer is. They want to think or see you think, and they want to understand your background. And so that's a great time to explain what you've done in summer camps or that you've been tutoring or whatever. And so through this packet of questions, I share why are they asking it and what the ideal response would be, and then give you planning space to kind of draft out your answers. And Kim, I'm sure you will meet with teachers if they ask for you to run through interviews, but I certainly will do that too if someone's just really nervous and wants to practice, because I think, just the awkwardness of getting that first one under your belt is great. And the more you do it, the better you get at just conveying who you are. Right.
And so then now on the flip side, though, because they're always saying, oh, do you have any questions for us? That's a dreaded question, too. So what are some questions that candidates should ask so that they can kind of feel out if the position or the school is a good fit for them?
Which 100% you should do is come with something to ask.
Right.
And one thing they'll say is, well, they answered all my questions in the interview. Well, have something. Like if you have a laundry list of questions, there's got to be something they haven't asked.
Right.
And my go-to, if they have answered all the questions, is what are the next steps? Because they probably haven't answered that one. But I would say a lot of the questions you need to ask are about the job. Like understand what is being asked of you. Are you teaching one subject? Are you teaching all subjects? How big is your team? What's the class size? What are expectations for lesson plans? Do you have to draft them as a team? Can you do it on your own? Is it electronic? Are people checking it? Can you get in and out of your classroom? Like just a lot of the logistics so you can imagine what my life will be like here, because you don't want to walk into the year thinking one thing and it's different. For me, it was really big that I understood who the leader was in front of me. So I would ask something like, how do you work with your administrative team, or who's on the administrative team, or what do you do to ensure everyone feels comfortable coming to you and talking to you about an important issue? And they're kind of like, wow, she wants to know about me. But it is important, because if you're kind of closed off and a dictator, I know that's not for me, but I've learned about myself. I remember talking with my cousin when she first got a teaching job. She said, I could have never worked for anyone else but this first person. He was so warm and fuzzy, and I needed that my very first year.
Right.
So think about it. What is it you need? And try and develop a question that'll help you ask that without kind of saying like, well, tell me about yourself.
Right.
But something where they'll give you some feedback and you'll say, I like the vibe. I can see myself working here. I understand the job parameters. And I feel that it's fair. You don't want to get in there and they're like, hey, you also have recess duty and lunch duty and bus duty, and you have to do a club. And you're like, wait a minute. None of that was told to me.
Right. And do you think it's appropriate to ask why the previous person left?
I've never been in a position to know, maybe because my school district is so large, what openings they have and why.
Okay.
So maybe if you went to a private school, it'd be more obvious. But for me, and they've got so many candidates they're asking, one of the questions is just what grade levels are open.
Right.
Because sometimes they'll just say they need an elementary educator, not a specific grade. So for me, I have not had that opportunity. I wouldn't suggest diving into asking the details of that, only because that may seem like, oh, you're a rumor starter, you're into the gossip, and you definitely don't want them to think that.
Right. Okay, good point. Okay, so now let's say I nailed the interview. Yay, and I got the job.
Yay.
And, the room is cleaned out and it's ready for me to move in. So how should I start planning for the setup? Because, everyone's been looking like on Pinterest and on Instagram with these beautiful classrooms, and I wouldn't even know where to start. So where should I start in terms of the setup?
So I'm glad that you brought this up, because here's the thing about Pinterest and Instagram. It can make you feel like a horrible teacher, but none of that stuff is going to make you a better teacher. It makes the environment welcoming, and I think you should do that, but you don't have to go to like level 10 to do that. And I think color is really great for elementary kids, and different sounds. So I always used a bell, or I always had lamps. When the back to school happens for college kids, they have those floor lamps, fluorescent colors, and great discount. Go get some of those. But you don't have to make it look so picture perfect. And in fact, a principal comes in and all the kids are sitting still and the room looks great. And it's like, well, is learning really happening, or are kids just, behaving? And we don't want that. We want messy learning. We want active learning. We want the energy to be high. In control. But I would say for me, when I set up my room, I go inwards and I work out. So that means I do the desks first, whether I do groups or I do rows. So the inside of my room is ready. Then I move to the areas, the learning centers. In elementary school, you're definitely moving around the room. You have a reading nook, or you've got a math center with manipulatives, or you've got a science lab, or whatever it's going to look like. And then you kind of do the outside of the room for those areas and put the materials where they belong. And then you can start hanging things on the wall that go with those centers. And then you can move outside to do your bulletin board. So inwards, out. But again, do bare necessities, because you're just starting out. You don't know what you need. I bought tons of posters, and then my whole classroom wall was posters. I'm like, what am I going to do with all this? And some principals might want to start with bare walls so you can put student work. So that's, again, probably another question you want to ask your principal. But leave the decoration to the last if you have time, because I will tell you there are time constraints when it's back to school time. My school was always shut down during the summer to clean floors and desks and everything. So I couldn't get in for a week before PD. And 1 week is not a lot of time to set up a whole classroom.
Unless
so
you have
you can just
help.
Right, exactly. So I do the bare minimum, and then if you've got time and you've got money to do so, then you can cutesy it up. And for me, it always took kind of the first month where my room finally looked ready. It was ready day one, but before it really came together and had every little detail, because we were just really crunched on time. And that's okay, because it was about the teaching and the learning, not so much that I had the cute plant, or I finally got my rocking chair, or whatever else I had in there.
Well, and if let's say you only have a week before, school starts, you're not just doing classroom setup either during that time. There are other things you need to do.
Well, like a million meetings, you'll learn that very fast, and lesson planning, and you got to write a letter to parents welcoming their student to the school in your class, and you got to phone parents, let them know about the upcoming, parent teacher night. So there's a lot that goes on that week.
Most new teachers, in terms of how their classroom is set up, they only have their student teaching as a reference. So how should they determine what kind of organizational system they should use?
I would say first ask your team, like, hey, what are you guys using and what works? Because they're doing this each and every day. They know there's no reason that you need to start from scratch and that you have to do it alone. So certainly ask. Then look at what your room has to offer in terms of what do they have for organization. Maybe your school supplies you with things, or the teacher who had your room before has a lot of things left over. I know I had tons of bins, clear bins, which ended up being great because you could see inside them without, lifting the top, and whatever. And then I would make my list while I was setting things up and say, okay, I really would like this. And then I would go to the store and get whatever I needed. But a lot of the times the organization came from whatever was used before or whatever was already in there, or based on your subject. Like when I only taught literacy, I needed tons of bins for my books. But I went around the school first and said, hey, who has bins they're not using? And I didn't really have to go buy much. So just try and think things through before you're like, oh my gosh, I have so much to do. Like use what's at your fingertips.
Right. That's actually a good tip for me, because I'm going to be a traveling teacher next year. And, I'm like, okay, I'm going to get this cart. And in my mind, I'm wondering, okay, what am I going to put in the cart? What do I really need to cart between classrooms? So do you know what I mean? How much of a cart do I need?
Exactly.
And so I like this idea of, okay, what are you going to use it for? Who else might have something before you go and, especially for new teachers, drop the money that they don't have yet.
Oh, God, yes.
Because for us, it even took like, I think a month of teaching before we even got our first paycheck. And so
for us too,
that was tough.
And you don't really know, what you're going to use, or you think it's cute, or, oh, I'll definitely use this thing. Cause you go to Hobby Lobby, which we have by us. I don't know if you have that, but or you go to Walmart and Target Dollar Spot and you find all these awesome things and you're like, I'll use this one day. And then you're looking at like hundreds of dollars of stuff. And you're like, I've never used this once. Like most, I think.
Right. So frustrating and wasteful.
Totally.
Now, you had mentioned supplies. Now, how do you determine which ones, which school supplies you'll provide versus the ones that you put on a list, like a school supply list? Like, because I know, like for me, sometimes the school provides it, like you said. And there have been times when I've just put everything on the list and the kids never get it. Depending on the area that you teach. So how do you determine what you're going to provide?
So first of all, you ask your team again, like, what do you guys definitely 100% need? Like top 3, top 5 items. If I get to create my list, I keep it short and sweet, or I divide it and I say, okay, if your last name is A to P, these are the supplies I'm asking for, and whatever to Z. And that helps everyone know, like, okay, she doesn't need this many Kleenex boxes, but she still needs them, or this many crayons or whatever. And then usually that first week, everyone dumps it in. Or if you're smart, you can say, come to back to school night with your stuff, lay it out. And that gives the teacher a few more days to be like, reassess and figure out what they need. So after you ask the staff or the school, what is it that generally I can ask of people? Think about, like you mentioned, who your population is. I had folks that couldn't afford anything.
Right.
Luckily, when I was a Title I teacher, they had this place called Classroom Central where people donated classroom supplies and I could go shopping once a month for 25 items. And I could use that for my kids that weren't able to bring anything in. But really look at that list and say, like, do I really need this huge binder or
right.
This pencil case? It's like, no, the kid needs pencils and paper. And do you need tape? I don't know. I could do without tape, but I really want some glue sticks, or I hate glue sticks because they always dry up. I want that, just really decide what your top 3 or top 5 items are and go to bat for them. And then what you can do at open house night is, and I did a little tree and I had apples on the tree and they were additional items that would be for the students, but I didn't need everyone to bring one in. Maybe I need staples or construction paper or something. And so if a parent wanted to, they could take an apple home with them, get the item and bring it in as a donation. And that would be above and beyond. But again, you got to know your population and what people are willing to do. So start bare bones and go from there.
Okay. And then actually, I've seen those types of trees when my daughter was in elementary school.
Oh,
so I remember that. I was like, oh, I can pick what I want to donate. That's awesome. Now, do you teach students how to keep them organized, or do you just have them put it in a pencil pouch?
Oh, Lord, no. Yeah, you can have diagrams that show them like the inside of their desk, like this is where this sits and this is where this sits. And you might think this is the craziest thing. But if I don't take the time now to teach this, then all year long, I'm battling the messy desk thing and can't stand it. Or the kid that comes in with 500 pencils, like, you know what, you could probably keep those in your backpack or your cubby, and let's just bring 3 to our desk. So you have to just teach them some of these norms but again, you've got to think all that through. Like, what do you want kids to do with all these supplies? So I would have an assembly line. Kids drop everything off at the back counter. We'll go through it at a later time. Come sit down with your backpack and let's get to learning. And then throughout the day, I'd say, okay, I'd have a TA or I'd have myself throughout, bathroom break or something. I'd be organizing everything, and then we'd kind of figure out a system. So in your head, prior to the first day of school, decide where these items are going to go, what you want them to look like, and then you've got to teach the students how to follow those procedures, and then make sure you're following through with them. You can't let it go one time because it's going to become a bigger mess. But yes, very nitty gritty teaching of organization is necessary.
I can imagine, because at that point they might just all go up and get, colored pencils and en masse, and everyone's pushing, and then the bin falls over.
Exactly. And I've had, the other school I taught in with the suburban students that had a lot of parental involvement, those parents took care of all that for me. They were back there organizing. They had a label maker for everything. They had blue folders for math and red folders for reading. And they took care of it all. And I'm like, that's a lot of detail. I certainly didn't have that time, but I was so thankful to use my resources. So that, again, goes back to knowing your crowd.
Right. Okay. So now I've got a good idea of my classroom setup. So let's talk about planning. So how should I determine like the schedule for the day? Because I know everything is just so structured, especially if I can't get a hold of my like grade level team members ahead of time. How do I know like the schedule, curriculum, all of that?
For me, I've never had the wonderful blessing of designing my own day because we all borrowed assistance from each other. So the front office would create a master schedule. So your schedule is given to you, which is great. But everything else, there's tons of stuff you can do. In fact, I wrote a blog post, 10 ways to prepare for the upcoming school year during the summer. If you're seeing the video, here it is. But basically, I'm giving you options like reviewing the standards in the curriculum. You can do that at the beach. Like just go through and say, okay, this is what I'm teaching, and this is to the detail to which I'm teaching it, and do I even understand it myself? Definitely research instructional techniques. I gave a shout out to Teach Like a Champion. I 100% think that would be a good one. And they even have videos online if you want to search some of those techniques. Connecting with other educators, whether it's on Twitter or Instagram or Facebook, like find your tribe so that you can share ideas and learn from each other over the summer. You can plan your first day of school activities in elementary school. It's a lot of fun getting to know you things. So you can look on Pinterest for that or just do a Google search, but you want to do something fun and interactive and you can plan that. Planning your furniture setup like we chatted about, writing your welcoming letter to students. I mentioned that one earlier, getting everything organized. If you do have a chance to get in your classroom much earlier, that's great. Purchasing whatever you need, assembling your wardrobe for teachers.
Oh, right.
Oh my gosh. I had so many blunders because I didn't think about, I'm raising my hands all the time and out of excitement, or I'm pointing and my shirt may not be long enough, or I'm always on the floor because we're doing little reading groups and it's like I'm pulling up my pants, or I'm on my feet all the time, or we're dancing around or moving around a lot. My shoes are uncomfortable. So I learned a lot that first year about what to wear and what I needed to do in the dressing room to make sure this passed the test. People probably thought I was doing cartwheels in there, but anything I could do to make sure like, hey, this outfit's staying on and it's comfortable, but it still looks professional. So anyway, check out that blog post if you're trying to ask yourself, what can I prepare over the summer? Besides me just listing those two, I tell you in more detail what that looks like and how to do it.
Now, just out of curiosity, like, in terms of like when you do math and reading and all of that, is that up to your team? Or do you get to decide on your own?
In terms of a schedule?
Right.
Yeah, so they'll generally say this is what your day looks like for third grade team. And then from there, you guys decide what the block looks like. Like maybe we do word work first and then we do a writing or whatever. But they tell you this is the time because you generally have assistants coming in. Or if you have English language learners, they're getting pulled out. Or if you have students with disabilities, maybe they're getting some support. So that schedule is usually given to you. But again, that's based on my district that's really large and they had to share a lot of folks. So if you're at a smaller, more intimate school, you might be able to create all this from scratch. Or maybe there's another person on your team and you can do it together. If you do have that opportunity, highly suggest doing cognitive stuff in the morning because students are fresh-faced, like the reading and the math, and more fun, interactive things in the afternoon because by then kids are like tapped out. Their brains need a break, and they may not be as focused, especially if you're testing on reading and math. You definitely want them where their brains are ready to go in the morning.
Oh, okay. That's good to know. That's what I was wondering about is the best way to structure your day. And I know at like my daughter's school, each teacher on the team specialized in something else. So then they'd have like a rotation. So they wouldn't necessarily stay in their classroom for math. Like half the kids would be with one teacher for reading and the other would be for math or science or social studies. So I know that every school is different. I was just curious what your experience was with that.
Yeah, that's departmentalizing. So that teacher would teach that same lesson over and over and over to get each of the classes through, but she may have a lower group and a higher group and whatever, but you do have that base lesson. So it is helpful to know like, hey, how many classes of this am I teaching? And, how long of a block do I have? And then what's tricky about what you were mentioning is the transition time. Then you're teaching 5 minutes less because you've got a couple minutes up front, a couple minutes at the end where kids are getting ready, they're coming in or going. And so that makes it difficult. So lots of little things to think about.
And you have to teach those transitions, right?
Oh, yes.
Let's talk about the fun part, which is teacher supplies. I think it's fun. It's stuff I get to buy for myself. What are some basic teacher supplies that elementary teachers should have on hand aside from whiteboard markers?
Those are great. I wrote a blog post about this too, called A List of Must-Have Supplies for the First Year Teacher. And this did not come from me. I have a group just for new teachers on Facebook at the elementary level, and they all threw in their suggestions. Like, these are the must-have things. So certainly come check this out. From office supplies, and please don't pay full price for anything, because there are going to be tons of sales this summer. Just keep watching. Make your list of things you think you want. At the elementary level, we love cutesy colored pens. Using red pen is just kind of not encouraged anymore. Right. So orange and green and whatever else you like, or stickers and stamps. I loved having my name on everything. So I had a little store I would look at, and they'd personalize everything. So that was my big thing that I was willing to spend a little extra money on. But then there's just organizational supplies, which we talked a lot about already. One thing about instructional supplies, I had an Easy Grader when I didn't have a calculator on hand. I don't know if you had this, Kim, but it tells you how many questions on a test, and then you can move the paper through this little peak hole, and it tells you if you get one wrong, that's 90, and this two wrong, and it's 87. And it made everything, so I didn't have to keep recalculating what these grades were. So if they still have those out there, oh my gosh, I lived by that. And tons of classroom library books. If you go to anywhere, any donation places, they've got tons that they can use, because your kids need to read. It doesn't need to be a perfect brand new book, but they need to see lots of different types of books. And then decor. That's the fun part, to go to like a teacher supply store and get all the cutesy decor stuff, but just be careful and make sure you have all the necessary items first, and then have some fun making your classroom look like a home.
Okay. And then I know that I've seen on Instagram a lot of teachers have cry-cut machines. Is that how you say it? And they also have laminating machines. Do you recommend that a first-year teacher drop some cash on that right away?
Well, I would know my school and I'd know my team. So for me, my school had those things and I didn't have to purchase them.
Nice.
When I transitioned to a different school, the school didn't have it, because having Title I funds at that first school made it a lot easier to get some of these things. So the next school didn't have them, but my team went in and we bought one together, and it stayed in our planning room. And so we were able to utilize things. Cry cut's great if you're cutting out shapes and letters and whatever. But the lamination, I would 100%, if you're going to choose, I would definitely say that, because you're creating things that you want to use again and again and again. So literacy and math stations get a lot of use. And if you give them a piece of paper, it's ripped by the first 5 minutes. But if you laminate something and give them a whiteboard marker, you can reuse it and reuse it and reuse it. And it's so great, and cuts down on paper copies of every student having it constantly. So 100% think that is worth it if it's within your budget. But again, that's not necessary to start things off. So please don't feel like you need to, again, go back to those 3 or 5 items you 100% need for students, and same thing for you.
Right. Yeah, it's so tempting too when you see people show all the stuff that they're making on those machines. I'm like, oh, that looks like fun. No, Kim, stop. You don't need that.
That is the thing about school should be fun and teaching should be fun. But sometimes we get so caught up in fun, and then we get in trouble with our lessons not lining up to standards and curriculum, which is the boring stuff. But unfortunately, it's the most important stuff. So definitely add flair to your teaching, but there is a fine line there. And go crazy and have fun with it, but learn from someone else that's doing it, so that you can decide, I can see myself really using this, or, this is fun once or twice, but I don't need it for myself.
Exactly.
And, maybe Santa Claus will give you something over Christmas that you can
there you go. And also there's always donorschoose.org.
Exactly. Yes. Have you talked about that on your podcast yet?
Yes. And, they'll give you practically anything. They'll even fund class parties. You just have to put it out there. So the cry cut machine could be, it would be purchased for your school, though. It's not your own personal one. But at the same time, then you can get like the top of the line one if it's going to get a lot of use with you and your team.
Absolutely. 100% agree with Donors Choose. And there's plenty of people on your team or in your school that know how to write one, or Google or ask Kim. I'm sure there's tons of people that can help you write one.
Exactly. Now, before I let you go, what are your top tips for feeling empowered and confident for a new teacher and their first year of teaching elementary?
Well, the best thing you can do to feel empowered is connect with other people going through the same thing. You've got to feel like you're not alone, because there's going to be hard days, but there's going to be great days, and you want a team to celebrate and people that really get what you're going through. And you remember everything that was on your lesson plan or the right order, and you didn't have to look at it, just the small victories. Right. And there are going to be days where you're overwhelmed, like it's coming. And as long as you acknowledge it, there's days I'm gonna be like, I can't do it all. Then when it comes, you're not as freaked out because you've expected it. It comes as a wave, and just as fast as it comes, it goes, and there'll be another day behind it. And so I think the best advice I can give you for kind of staying confident and calm is to have some sort of time in your day built in where you can reflect on what's coming. So you get your head wrapped around a plan. And again, that's that preventative stuff. But then you also take time to reflect and think, how did that go? What can I tweak for tomorrow? Because you might think that's silly. I can do that on the car ride. Well, maybe on the car ride, you want to blast your music like I did on days. I didn't want to sit and reflect. So take time somewhere in your day to just process. Because if you have a process, you can create a plan, and then you're able to really be proficient in the classroom.
Perfect. I love that. And I'm all about being reflective. I think it really helps you also reframe what's going on. So, at first we might have like an initial emotional reaction, but when you reflect and you reframe, then you can see how you can get through it. So I love that piece of advice. Now you have listed a bunch of resources. And so you guys, I'm going to list all of those in the show notes so you can grab everything that Gretchen had mentioned to help you out with your first year in elementary. And where else can my listeners get a hold of you?
Just go to alwaysalesson.com. That's where my blog is, and the podcast and the resources. All my social media handles are there. So that's just the easiest thing for you to do. Or tune in to my podcast and you can hear Kim's interview. She was great on my show. We should link that episode too.
Okay, yes, we'll definitely do that. And be sure to subscribe to Always a Lesson. I listen to that podcast as well, you guys, and you're going to get a lot between the two of us. You're going to feel really great about your first 2 years of teaching.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much, Gretchen, for being on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. This was a blast.
That was definitely an awesome conversation that I had with Gretchen, and I'm so glad that she cleared up so much for us. So here are my key takeaways. First of all, when it comes to the interview for an elementary school position, be prepared to answer content level questions specifically to a grade that you might be teaching, and also have some questions prepared for them, even if it's, asking them about the schedule, what are some of the basic duties and expectations? Find out. That way if this job is going to be the right fit for you. Now, I wouldn't start asking about pay or benefits or anything like that, because I personally feel like that's inappropriate at this time. But in the interview, you can ask more details so that you can get to know the school beyond what you would Google and find on their website. I also really like that Gretchen encourages you to reach out to your grade level team and find out what they do. So maybe you have an idea of how you want your classroom to run, how you want the schedules to be based on your, student teaching experience. But then when you get there, it might be completely different. So find out and see what they're doing before you spend too much time planning, if you can. There are times when you can't reach them because they're on vacation, and Gretchen goes into what to do if you can't get a hold of them. But I would definitely, take some time to wait before you dive in too much on like buying some materials on Teachers Pay Teachers. You can definitely plan for that first day of school, but beyond that, Gretchen suggests that you wait to talk to your team. Also, pace yourself when it comes to setting up your classroom. Don't spend money on everything because you don't even really know what you need yet. There might already be things there for you, and then you spend all that money. There's definitely shiny object syndrome, especially if you go to, Target or some kind of teacher store. But wait and hold back and see first what you actually need. Your school might be providing a lot, and then go shopping. Make a list and figure out what you need to make your classroom look the way that you want it and run smoothly. She also mentioned things like if you want to get a cry cut machine or, laminating, that maybe your school already has that. Now, my school doesn't have a cry cut machine because in middle school, I've found that we don't really use that as much, but we do have a giant industrial size laminating machine that works perfectly. So we definitely don't need to buy that. So I really loved my conversation with Gretchen. I had such a good time talking to her, and she is a wealth of knowledge. So I encourage you to go to alwaysalesson.com, where you can find all of her materials, and you can also get links to her podcast. And whatever you're listening to this podcast on right now, whether it's your phone or your computer, make sure that as soon as this episode ends that you find Always a Lesson and you subscribe to her podcast as well, because it is awesome. And if you want to hear my conversation with Gretchen on her podcast, I'm going to put that in the show notes so that you can link over to that. So good luck with all of your back to school shopping and back to school planning. Don't go overboard. And I hope you have a fabulous week.
Thanks for listening to the Teachers Need Teachers podcast. Love this episode? Head over to Apple Podcast or Google Play to subscribe, rate, and leave a review.